Well, we've got another special reading here. Now, this is one I have to admit I might have heard of, and then I didn't really, I might have heard of once and then never saw it again. And then all of a sudden I see it as part of the readings, which is kind of crazy because I've obviously read it every other year for 32 years. But somehow I never made the connection, and so this time I did. Well, gee, Father, what the heck are you talking to? You haven't described it yet. So I got to change. I got to use that voice. That's my favorite voice. Besides the one I use. I should say that's besides the one I use. But this is the prayer that is made after in the fire that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego suffered. And it's interesting because one of the men, I think it's Abednego, actually has two names. And one of his names is used in the prayer. But this comes from the book of Daniel. Now, keep in mind that the book of Daniel actually was written during the time closer to the Maccabean revolt, which is a couple hundred years before Christ. So actually, I think we might be talking about Aristotle's time. I'll have to look that up as I'm talking to you and not make it obvious that that's precisely what I am doing. But I think that is around the time of Aristotle. I think. I always get a kick out of his name in Spanish. Aristoteles. No, I wrote it wrong. I wrote, when does Aristotle? Okay, when did Aristotle live? And I misspelled Aristotle again. Aristotle. No, I spelled it right. Okay, let's go. When did Aristotle live? 384. So it's actually after the life of Aristotle. So he was a student of Plato. So, and coming to find out, it says here, this is from what's it called? Copilot. So this is the Bing AI stuff. Actually, I didn't realize that he tutored Alexander the Great. Now, Alexander the Great's... now we're going to have to kind of click back a little bit. Okay, Daniel was written during the time of the Maccabean revolt. Now, the Maccabean revolt happened... we talked about that last year. Maccabean revolt happened when these Greeks came in and they wanted to make one big happy religion, remember? And then the Jews would have to start eating pork. But look, remember that scene? All you have to look, if you just have the pork dinner, have a little pork, a little mashed potatoes, a little peas, hey, we'll all be done. If you don't do that, we're going to have to torture you to death. So why don't you just eat the pork, eat the peas, eat the mashed potatoes, and we'll all be a little happy here, you see? Well, those people who were running that, it was, the king at the time, the Greek king, was actually an agent of Alexander the Great. It's one of his servant, not servants, but one of his, what would you call him? One of his agents. I'll just call him his agent. He was a king working for Alexander the Great. So this is kind of fascinating. And then after that comes the generation that brings in the Maccabean revolt. So that's the time when Daniel was written, but it takes place during the Babylonian exile, which, remember, happens in the 6th century BC. So it's written during the 2nd, 3rd century BC, and it takes place during the 6th century BC. And that's unimportant. It can be kind of confusing for a lot of people, but that's the story. Well, in the story of Daniel, you have the case of King Nebuchadnezzar. And remember what I always explain to you, all the gods, not saints, all the gods are nationalistic. And that's an interesting thing to keep in mind, because our saints are not nationalistic. All the saints represent the kingdom of heaven. Back then, the gods protected their nations. So the god of the Babylonians was not the god of the Greeks, was not the god of the Macedonians, was not the god of whomever. So the god of the Babylonians was the god of the Babylonians. And now the people who were part of the exile of the Jews, they were part of the exile, they were stolen and brought into Babylon. And what happens is, here they are, they're brought into Babylon. And part of that is they are forced to worship the god of the king, who was King Nebuchadnezzar, and they refuse. So the king gets all upset, throws through these three men who are Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and puts them into a fire, makes the fire super hot, puts them into a fire where they are assumedly going to die. And you could also say this was kind of a sacrifice to their god. Well, what happens? A fourth man appears inside the fire, and he's going, wait a minute, I threw three people in there. How are there four? And so there are four people in there. And with the four people in there, all of a sudden they come to realize they're not burning. They're kind of comfortable. And there's a story that happened in Siberia, which is very similar. They're actually kind of comfortable. And then he realizes that, in fact, the God of the Jews is far greater than the God of the Babylonians. So it is in the fire that this prayer is spoken out by Azariah, who would actually be Abednego. Blessed are you, O Lord, the God of our fathers. Remember, by the way, this is Daniel 3:26 and following, and this is from the Catholic Public Domain version. Blessed are you, O Lord, the God of our fathers, and your name is praiseworthy and glorious for all ages. For you are just in all the things that you have accomplished for us, and all your works are true, and your ways are right, and your judgments are true. For you have made equally true judgments in all the things that you have brought upon us and upon Jerusalem, the holy city of our fathers, for in truth and in judgment you have brought down all these things because of our sins. For we have sinned and we have committed iniquity in withdrawing from you, and we have offended in all things. Remember, the reason why they were in Babylon, because they refused, they disobeyed the Lord in all things and became idolaters. And we have not listened to your precepts, nor have we observed or done as you have ordered us, so that it might go well with us. Therefore, everything you have brought upon us and all that you have done for us, you have done in true judgment. And you have delivered us into the hands of our enemies, traitors, unjust and most wicked, and to a king unjust and most wicked, even more so than all the others on earth. And we are now not able to open our mouths. We have become a shame and a disgrace to your servants and to those who worship you. Do not hand us over forever, we ask you, because of your name, and do not abolish your covenant. And do not withdraw your mercy from us because of Abraham, your beloved, and Isaac, your servant, and Israel, your Holy One. You have spoken with them, promising that you would multiply their offspring like the stars of heaven, like the sand on the seashore. For we, O Lord, are diminished more than all other peoples, and we are brought low throughout all the earth this day because of our sins. Neither is there at this time a leader or ruler or a prophet, nor any holocaust or sacrifice or oblation or incense or place of first fruits in your eyes, so that we may be able to find your mercy. Nevertheless, with a contrite soul and a humble spirit, let us be accepted, just as in the holocausts of rams and bullocks, as in the thousands of fat lambs, so let our sacrifice be in your sight this day, in order to please you. For there is no shame for those who trust in you. And now we follow you wholeheartedly, and we fear you, and we seek your face. And it continues from there. But notice that part. The king Nebuchadnezzar cast them into the fire as a sacrifice to his gods, and they made themselves a sacrifice to their God. And they made them literally a sacrifice. And look what happens. They don't burn. And with that, the king realizes, King Nebuchadnezzar, I've made this great mistake. He comes back and he honors from that point on the God of the Jews. So it's a powerful moment. This is one of the great things. You know, I always do the first reading. And the funny thing about the first reading is the first reading is either the Old Testament or the New Testament. The New Testament is usually the letters, and there's so many fascinating things in the letters. The epistles. The Old Testament is some of these powerful stories, and they're great stories too. And one of the things I always bring up, because we're talking about King Nebuchadnezzar. So always remember, I know you've heard this story before, but some of you who haven't listened for a while or haven't listened, you're listening for the first time. Some of you haven't listened for a while. Well, now you're going to hear the story that you should have heard before. Just kidding. Some of you haven't heard this story, so I'll tell it. King Nebuchadnezzar would come out of his palace and he'd walk down the street. And on that street where his palace was located were these walls, just like any place else. You find these big, not like stone walls, but these walls of major, whatever they would have used. Maybe it was some form of adobe or something like that. But it was these walls that you'd find in the ancient walls that you'd find in Jerusalem today. On these walls were mosaics made of bricks of a lion. And the lion was a symbol of the king, the kingdom of Babylon, of the empire. So it was a symbol. There were 120 lions, 60 on one side of the street, 60 on the other. One of those lions is in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and you can actually go there and see the actual lion that would, not a replica, not this is what it would have looked like. It's the actual one from the time of King Nebuchadnezzar. And it's in an area where you can also look at some of the other artifacts from that era. It's fascinating. So that's at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, which is the Museum. Museum of Fine Arts has a tremendous collection. It has more Egyptian artifacts than any other museum outside of Egypt. It's fascinating. So that's one of the things you can see in the Museum of Fine Arts. So there it is, one of these 120 lions. And that will take you right to Babylon. It's a connection of you right to the time of the king of Babylon, right to the time that this is written. It reminds me of the time I was taking a tour of the museum. And it's funny because he's King Nebuchadnezzar, right? I mean, how many people have you met in your life named Nebuchadnezzar? It would be fun, trust me. It would be fun to name your son Nebuchadnezzar. It would be fun. I know it would be cruel, but think of all the teachers who say, Nebuchadnezzar, is he here? Like that Key and Peele skit, which is hysterical. Nebuchadnezzar, no, it's Nebuchadnezzar. You could have fun. And then you really think of it. If you think of it, this guy who you name Nebuchadnezzar, this poor kid, you could give him a shorter name or whatever, you poor kid, would win every single spelling bee for his entire life. Because if you can spell Nebuchadnezzar, you can spell anything. And there you'd go. That would be funny. But anyway, King Nebuchadnezzar. Well, so we're taking this tour, and they show him the lion. They said, this lion, this is connected to King Nebuchadnezzar. And I caught myself. I almost said, you mean the King Nebuchadnezzar, like there's 15 of them in the Bible. There isn't. There's one. Because, trust me, if there was more than one Nebuchadnezzar, you would know, because it's such a unique name. I know people who will I had a wonderful parishioner when I was in Quincy. And basically what she would do, I know people will not like this, especially the purists. She would just, when it came to the name, she would just say what he said. Because she couldn't figure out how to say Nebuchadnezzar. And you'd teach her, it says Nebuchadnezzar, and she just, what he said. Because it's what, Nebuchadnezzar, it's what, 5 syllables, and it's like 150 letters. Not really, but you see what I'm saying. So this is that whole story. But understand that powerful story, which we have a connection to, which comes to us from the book of Daniel, which was actually written during the time of Alexander the Great. I mean, this is fascinating that we can look at all this and connect it with some of our history. This is why it's so powerful. I was talking to someone today about how I studied biblical archaeology at Harvard University. And, that was one of the things. I only took a course, but that was one of the things you could look at that how to see things that you can connect all the way to history. And it might be just a brick wall, just as like a little brick wall in the woods, and you'll know, well, that brick, like here in locally, that brick wall was built by someone in the 1700s. We can tell. Fascinating. Anyway, we're going to be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Please subscribe. Please like. Please comment. And let us know. Subscribe on the Podbean app as well. And we'll be right back right after this. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media Podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and we're talking about some of the powerful things that we saw in relation to King Nebuchadnezzar and that whole story. But you can see how important it is to be able to connect these stories to real people. Now, I told you, Daniel was written during the time of the Maccabean revolt, which was in the roughly second, third century BC in Israel, but remember, in Jerusalem, rather, in Judah. Remember what that's all about. The Greek-oriented king who is connected to Alexander the Great. You mean the Alexander the Great? Yeah, the Alexander the Great. The Alexander the Great has decided, the world would be a better place if we all kind of believed the same thing. So what if we kind of had one big happy religion? It was what I like to describe is an Esperanto of religion. If you don't know what Esperanto is, it was this idea that people came where they wanted to they wanted to come up with a language that everyone could speak. So they invented Esperanto. And Esperanto was a combination of different languages so that you'd have kind of similar words that would enable people to speak. And so that's what they wanted to do. Well, it was one of those 19th century inventions that kind of looked like a good idea, but it didn't really catch on. I don't speak Esperanto. I speak Spanish and Portuguese. Strangely enough, if you think about it, because it's an invented language, there are other languages that, granted, a whole bunch of people don't speak, but some people do. And one of those languages is Klingon from Star Trek. Yeah, I think there's also the Romulan language, too. Some fans decided to create the language. And I do believe there are fans of Star Trek that can speak Klingon to each other. So it's kind of fascinating that this idea came. Well, back during the time of the Macedonians, they wanted to create one big happy religion. We're kind of looking in our world what happens when you don't listen to God. Remember what we believe. There is one God, and God is our name for him. His name for him is he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But our name for him is God. And so when we hear that term, he's God. Well, that's our name. God never gave himself that name. That is our name. As a matter of fact, he's never really told us his name. The closest we come to is, first of all, Yahweh, which is not his actual name. But the other thing is that God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's who he is. But that was the name he said for Moses to tell people that was his name. or no, that's what they could call him, and that's where we get Yahweh. But we don't have the name of God. And even if we take the name Jesus, we say, well, obviously Jesus is his name, at least the name of his son, and that is legally true because that was the name given to him when he was born. But what does Jesus mean? God is with us. So again, it goes back to that's what it means. That's what the name means. And we go back to, but who? It's not the name of God is with us. It is God is with us. So we see that. Well, anyway, this Esperanto of religions, well, look, obviously it didn't work. It was disastrous. But what was one of the important things that happened? The people came together and prayed, and they chose to fight off the Greeks. And that's where we have to be. The people came together and prayed, and they chose to fight off the Greeks. And that became the Maccabean revolt. But prayer was essential. And what was the sign they defeated the Greeks? They took back the temple, and the vigil light, which was a sign of the presence of God, was a candle that was only able to last for, they only had enough oil for the candle that would last for 1 day, and they wouldn't get more oil for another 8 days. And therefore, that light, that oil, was a symbol that God is present. It is the exact same idea, which, by the way, is the same time frame, too, of the vigil light we have in the tabernacle. The vigil light is that wax candle that you put in, that's that big tall thing, that lasts 8 days. I don't know whether that was a design or it just happens to be that's how much wax, that's how many days that much wax lasts. I don't know. But that lasts 8 days. Well, that 1 day's worth of oil lasted 8 days, which was the sign that God was back in the temple after the Greeks tried to run him out, and they put their pagan statues in the whole bed. And the Jews took over the temple again, and with that, there's a similar story out of Russia. With that, that 1 day's worth of oil lasted 8 days, and that's where we get Hanukkah. When Stalin, when the Bolsheviks took over Russia and they closed all the churches, there was a church in somewhere in Russia where the people knew eventually the Soviet Union would collapse. And so what they did is they made it look like they painted over the church. They had to paint over everything, and they had to turn these all into museums. But some of these people just got wallpaper, and they put the wallpaper up but made it look like paint. So when the Soviet Union fell, they went over to the wallpaper, pulled it off. It took hours. Pulled it, just hours. Pulled it off the walls, and within hours, the whole church was restored as it was from the 1917. Powerful story. And another one I wanted to tell you, because I told you the story about the guys that were thrown into the fire. Well, there's a story I read, comes out of Siberia. It's an Orthodox story where there was an Orthodox priest in prison in Siberia because they were trying to get rid of religion. And you've heard the story. I've told the story on the channel before. And they had a way of punishing people. As a matter of fact, one of our cardinals, Cardinal Minsky, died that way. They had a way of punishing people where they'd put them into these steel, I guess they look like outhouses, these steel cells. They were standalone cells out in the middle of Siberia where the people would suffer from extreme cold. And the law said they had to be there for 24 hours. So there was a fight. This priest interrupted the fight. He and the guy who was started the fight, he told the guards that these two went and beat him up when it was the other way around. He went to beat up the other guy, and the priest stopped it. And so the guards listened to that guy, the bully, and they took the man and the priest, and they put them, I don't know if they put them in the same cell or two different cells, but these two outhouse-looking things that were made out of metal in the ancient cold, the horrible cold of Siberia. But the priest said to the other guy, start praising God. And the two of them started praising God. And within seconds, according to the priest, they were in a field, in a meadow, filled with sunlight and flowers, and they were there, and it was a wonderful experience. That's where they were, in a sense. Well, after 48 hours, they're only supposed to be there for 24 hours. After 48 hours, it happened that one of the guards learned about this, one of the superior guards, and he came in and he told the guard who did this and allowed them to be there for 40 hours, Moscow will hear about this. You have done wrong. And they open up the one or two cells. I don't know if it was like one or two, but anyway, they opened the cells expecting the guys to just fall dead, and the two of them walked out like they were fine. It's a powerful. Hi, how are you? How are you doing? And that's the story. It's very similar to the fire story, except that you're dealing with cold. Very similar. So powerful stories we're kind of talking about here, and that's some of the things, and also all of it connected in some way with things we've studied, and we can see things that connected to us, and fascinating things. Anyway, we're going to be back tomorrow. Have yourself a blessed day. One quick note, Putin is Russian Orthodox, same religion as Putin. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a blessed day. The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.